Here, and those of you on via technology, our YouTube channel, Facebook Live. And I'm continuing with the Balanced Message series, which this series is about money, but it's about being balanced. So there's a lot of aspects to money, right? We've got what we earn, what we spend, the whole debt situation, struggling against materialism and greed. And so this series is about how do we live balanced? How do we manage our finances and money in such a way that we don't get out of balance? And so we started with this, with these laws of balance that we're going to review again today. So we're kind of relating laws of regular balance to financial balance. And there's three main principles of balance. The first is a reference point. And so for balancing a stick, my reference point is the top of the stick. I need to keep my focus on that because that determines that I can keep it balanced and vertical. And so financially, our reference point is the money we're spending. And so remember it this way, you need to be knowing where your money is going, right? So our reference points with staying financially balanced is where's our money going? Now the great news is in this digital age, it's very easy to track that. And if you're still a cash spender, well, it's really easy to just write down the date, what you bought, how much you spent. And if you're aware where your money's going, that kind of helps with balance. Now the third law is the principle, clear objective, that's what. And my objective here is to keep this stick balanced. And when it comes to being balanced financially, in week 2 we looked and we said, what does the Bible teach us? And a lot of people talk about, it's tithing or it's other great financial goals, or you want to provide for your family, or you want to continue to increase your income and all this. And after we looked at it, we thought, well, we can really boil our clear objective down to honoring God with everything we have. It's not just a percentage. I think giving God, we want to give to the church and give to ministry, but we want to honor God with everything we have, not just a little bit of it. And then since then we've been talking about the second principle, which is constant corrections. And last week, because in order to keep the stick balanced, I can't hold my right hand still. I got to keep it moving to keep the stick balanced. And so when it comes to finances, we need constant correction. And we, the first one we studied last week was to do with debt and how we looked at biblical principles. And God says we're blessed when we don't have to borrow, and we shouldn't borrow. That you become kind of indebted or almost a slave to the one who lends you the money. And those of us who have been in debt, which is pretty much all of us, we know when it comes to you get your money and you're in debt, well, I got to pay this back first. And so the person you're indebted to almost controls what you're doing with your money. And so one of the corrections we want to make is to try and not be in debt, especially for consumer debt, credit cards, those kind of things. And so we talked about that last week. Now today, we're continuing to look at constant corrections. And we want to look at another one, and this has to do with what do you do with your extra money? So point number 2 is, what about your extra money? Now, I can already hear what's going on in your head. Some of you are saying, what do you mean extra money? I don't have any extra money lying around. And so, what extra money? Some of you might argue that there's no such thing as extra money. And in a way you're true, because what we do when we have extra money is we do something with it. No one has extra money lying around, but we all have a lot. My goal today is to convince you that you do have extra money, and that what you do with your extra money shows something about what you believe. There's a spiritual aspect of it. In fact, what you do with your extra money shows what you believe and things that you may not even be aware that you believe. So we're going to be looking at a teaching of Jesus a little bit later, where he basically says, and this is my paraphrase, that the way you manage your extra money is a reflection of what's going on in your heart. And so that's the next point. What you do with it, with your extra money, is a reflection of your heart condition. But before I get to that, I want to make sure that you're convinced first that you have extra money, because some of you don't believe me. Some of you think that there is no extra, I just barely have enough, but you do. Here's the problem with extra money. It almost immediately gets consumed by something we do, or we save it so we can consume it later. And so we either consume it now or we put it in the bank so we can consume it later. That's what we generally do with our extra money. And so when I ask, what about your extra money? You say you don't have any because you either have saved it for something coming up or you've already spent it. But the reality is if you live indoors and you're eating food and your kids live indoor and they're eating food and have clothes to wear, right? Anything really beyond that is extra. You don't think you have any extra because you already did something with it and spent it. So some examples of extra money, maybe you went to a movie. That's extra money you use for that. Maybe you like to buy really expensive coffees. I don't drink coffee, I drink mainly diet soda. So that's what I do with some of my extra money. Do you have a cell phone? Well, you use extra money to get that. Do you have a car? Some of you might even have 2 or 3 cars in your family. That's extra money. Some of you think your extra money, you took it and you saved up for a down payment on a house. That's really good for you. That was a great thing to do with some of your extra money. You're building some equity, you've got a place that's going to be your own. But that's what you already did with some of your extra money. And so, I don't know if you've ever traded in something you have that worked fine for another one that does the same thing, like a cell phone, or maybe a gaming console. We do that with our extra money. You had one that worked fine. In fact, you were able to sell it. That's how good it worked. So you could get more money and use some of your extra to get something even bigger and better. You ever had a garage sale or yard sale? That was all extra stuff that you bought with your extra money, and now you're converting it back into extra money. And so the reality is, we don't really think like that. We think, I got my income, I got my money, I paid for everything, there's nothing left. We don't tend to think in terms of extra. And so I'm not trying to make anyone mad or anything, but I'm just trying to help you think of it in a new way. We have way more than we need. We have a lot of extra. And that's what I want to talk about today. The reality is that we do have extra, and that if we're going to be balanced financially, we have to figure out a strategy for what we do with our extra. But I've found in my life that really the only time I think about this, and or every time I ever feel like I have extra, is when I'm around someone who has very little. Like, I like to do a lot of vacationing in the Caribbean, and in doing that, I've spent some time in some very poor countries. In Mexico, for example. I can remember sometimes I was going to see some ancient ruins or something. I was on a bus, and we're just traveling down some back road, and I see these children dressed in like dirty rags, and I'm thinking to myself, this is probably their main or only set of clothes. And living in these shacks, and probably the thing that impacted me the most was I only went to Jamaica one time, and I happened to I was in this boat cruising down the edge of the shoreline, and there were all these little what we would call storage, they looked like storage jets. They were about 6 by 8, maybe 8 by 10. And these little shacks were people's homes. And we were there early in the morning, and I watched as these skinny little Jamaican children would come out of their little shacks. They'd walk 20 feet into the ocean and rinse off. That was their morning shower. And then they came back and went about their day. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I have so much extra compared to them. And the sad thing is it really only takes something like that, because we see everybody else. And I have what you have what I have. In fact, it usually looks like you have more than I do, right? That's how we think. And so Jesus told a parable, a story, that he talks about this very issue of the extra stuff we have. And Jesus was talking to non-rich, regular people, just like you and me. In fact, they were heavily taxed. They were being occupied by a foreign government, so they were not well-to-do. They were regular people, and they were probably like us. They thought, I don't really have anything extra. I need every dollar I get, and I put it to work. And so Jesus always taught in such plain terms and told these great stories that you start listening to the story and you're pretty sure he was talking about someone else. And then at some point you realize, no, he's talking about me. And that's what happened here. And so Jesus was talking to the regular people, and he's also talking to you and I. And so he begins, before he tells the story, with a really bold statement that most all of us would be like, I totally agree, I get this. So Luke 12:15, he says, then Jesus said, beware, guard against every kind of greed. And then he says the statement, he says, life is not measured by how much you own. So he says, you've got to be ready. Don't let greed get you. You don't value and measure what your life is about by your stuff, by what you own. And that story, that makes me think, I've seen life change so much in my lifetime. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was very impolite to even look materialistic or greedy. But then things changed in the 80s and 90s. I remember there was a movie with Michael Douglas, I think it was Wall Street, and the big line was, greed is good. And you're like, no, it's not. But there was a changing attitude in the country. And when I was in seminary, I was taking some of my extra money, and I was getting into a new hobby of radio-controlled cars. And a buddy of mine and I, we bought these kits, just a pile of nuts and bolts and things. We put it together, we built these little radio-controlled cars. And I remember going to the toy store to get this, and the owner had this sign on the wall. It's the first time I'd ever seen it. He who dies with the most toys wins. And I was hoping that it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, a joke, but the reality was it wasn't fully a joke. It was like, you have, and what he was basically saying is, life is measured by how much you own, which we know is not true. I think most of us would instantly agree with Jesus. We know. You got to have some stuff, and it's nice to have some extra stuff, but we know that's not the full measure of life. We know life is much more than that. And so I think we agree, the front end Jesus likes is, life isn't measured by how much you own. And I think there's yes, I get that. We know that. We know it's about life experiences, relationships. There's so much more to life. And ultimately, the spiritual side, our relationship and connection to God. But what's interesting is that yet we see people who lose a lot of stuff, maybe everything, and they're just devastated, sometimes even committing suicide. And so we rationally know life is not measured by stuff. It's not about money. But yet we act oftentimes as if our stuff means the most to us. Like it really is the most valuable thing. And so Jesus is trying to help the people understand this. He hits them with the principle. We all say, oh yeah, I get that. And then he tells a story. And those of us that, you own a car or two, you go to movies, you upgrade your cell phone, when the one you have is already still working fine. Jesus is teaching us that we have extra, first of all. And I want us to know that we do. And when you have extra, you run the risk of living your life as if the main measure of life is about how much you have. Right? That's the risk when you have extra. And so basically, if you think that all the money that comes your way, all your extra, is for you to consume, or save so you can consume later, or that it's for your kids to consume or to consume later, basically what you're saying is, it's all about me and about how much I can get. You're basically treating all the extra as if it's like necessity, air, food, and shelter and clothes. And so that means if we do that, we're at risk of making our life about our abundance of stuff and money. And that's a very dangerous thing. The love of money, greed can get a hold of you, and we're not balanced when we do that. So we know intellectually this is not right, but yet we risk in practice how we deal with it. So it's very important what we do with our extra, and it really does show something in our hearts. So I'm going to get to the story. starting with verse 16 of Luke 12. Jesus is telling a story. He says, a rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. What he's basically saying is, what am I going to do? God, I've been blessed so much, I have all this extra. What am I going to do with it? Then he said, I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. This is a bit of an exaggeration. And Jesus is telling us for a fact. He says, then I'll have room enough to store all of my wheat and other goods. So if I tear these barns down and build bigger ones, I'll have room for all my extra. That's what he's saying. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, talking to himself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. And so this guy noticed that the Lord had blessed him. And I'm sure the people listening thought, God has blessed this guy and made him rich, because God's the one who makes it rain. He's the one who makes the sun shine. This guy has tons of crops. He's doing well. He's had so much extra, he didn't have a place to store it. His attic was full, his garage was full, his basement was full, his storage unit was full. He had everything. So like, I got to get more room to store everything. I'm going to make bigger barns. And of course, Jesus is, he really is exaggerating his point. We don't have to get to the point where we need bigger houses for all our extra, although many people have done that. We don't have to store crops in barns. We convert a lot of our extra to money, and that doesn't take up any space. But this guy was preparing to use and store up and live on all this extra. He's going to eat, drink, and be merry. Now, I'm guessing at this point in the story, most of the people listening are thinking, man, this guy's a financial genius, and God has blessed him so good. Good for him. He's the hero. They're thinking, this is the hero of the story, because he has done well for himself, he's managed his finances well, and he's doing well. But then in verse 20, Jesus totally flips the story. It says, but God said to him, you fool. And I think at this point, it's very likely Jesus' audience was very confused, because they don't get it. What do you mean, fool? This guy's smart. God has blessed him. What's the problem here? God has blessed him with all this extra, which is very true. But God calls the man a fool, not because he has extra, but because of his plan for the extra. That's the problem. That's why he's foolish. He's a fool. He's foolish because he assumed that all the extra was for himself and his future or for his family. Basically, this man is fulfilling the initial warning that life is measured by how much you can accumulate. And Jesus said, that's not the truth. And so, continuing on, but God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So, to put your focus on earthly riches while ignoring your relationship with God, or some versions call it being rich towards God, is foolish. And so that begs, of course, the question, how do we have a rich relationship with God? How do we be rich towards God? And that's the third point. How can we be rich towards God? And Jesus answers this later on in his teaching in verses 33 and 34. Here's what he says. He says, sell your possessions. Now, that makes us nervous, right? Now, obviously, Jesus is not saying sell everything. He's saying sell some of the extra, right? So he says, sell your possessions and give to those in need. This will store up treasure for you in heaven. And the purses of heaven never get old or develop holes. You don't have to worry about your treasure in heaven getting a hole in your pocket and having stuff fall out. It says, your treasure will be safe. No thief can steal it, and no moth can destroy it. And then he says, in verse 34, he says, this key verse, I think this is where we started the series. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. And he reminds us there's this connection between the things we love and value and focus on in our hearts, and how this can be a real problem when it comes to wealth and possessions. So, what do we do to have a rich relationship with God, be rich towards God? Sell your extra stuff for others. Right? Sell some of your extra stuff for others. And we know that Jesus didn't need to sell everything. We know that from how he lived, we all need a certain amount to survive. But he did mean that we should sell at least some of it. Definitely some of the extra. So how do you fight against materialism and greed and the temptation to focus too much on money and stuff? The answer is you give some of it away. You don't treat it like it's all mine. I'm going to save it and spend it. It's all me, right? We realize that when God gives us extra, it isn't all for us to consume or for our kids to consume or for us to save it for later. So, next point, don't think all your extra is for you and your family. And so I believe that the solution to our extra problem is to create a new line item. That's the title of the message today. And help others. The antidote for materialism and greed is generosity. And so the challenge today is for you to create a new line item and pre-decide to be generous. That's the last point. Pre-decide to be generous. So I got some challenges for you today. This week we're working on principle number 2 of balancing, the constant corrections. And we want to stay balanced. We want to make sure that we're not keeping all the extra for ourselves, because there's a danger then that we're like all about, and maybe it's the focus is on me and how much wealth I can accumulate. God says this kind of behavior is foolish. So we want to pre-decide to give some of our money away. And I tell you, focus on percentages. Dollar amounts can be deceiving. You can give $100 to someone, or $200, or even $300, $400, $500. That sounds like a lot of money. It is a decent amount of money. But then if you consider that percentage-wise, that's pretty small. If you make $50,000 a year, that's 1%, right? So if you give $500. So we want to focus on percentages. So here's challenge number 1, all right? This is the diagnostic. This says, where am I? And these are tied to the next steps. So challenge number 1, add up all the money you gave last year in 2020. Here's how much I gave away. Now, figure the percentage. Here's my gross income. Here's what I earned. Here's what I gave away. Here's what I'm giving. Now, the average American gives 2% away. And so that's the way to start. Where am I at? What am I doing with my extra? Challenge number 2, this gets a little heavier. Pre-decide what percentage you're going to give away. So what percentage of my income should I, my extra, what should I do? What percentage? This is going to force you to deal with these serious issues Jesus is talking about today. Are you just living to consume and spend everything that you get on yourself and your family? Are you being what Jesus calls foolish by measuring your life by the accumulation of your stuff? Now, this is about pre-deciding I'm going to be rich in my relationship toward God. I'm going to store up my treasures in heaven, not just towards myself. And I want you to know this isn't about me trying to, increase the income of Stepping Stones. The people of Stepping Stones are very generous, and the money we get is God provides for the ministry we have to do. This is really about you and your heart. And so I would say if you're already giving to the church, you might want to consider changing your percentage, increasing it, and giving it to something else. Maybe you want to support the missionaries, the sheriffs who were here a few weeks ago, or we got this fundraiser coming up for the Pregnancy Resource Clinic. They're an amazing ministry in town, or something else that touches your heart. So I want you to know this isn't all about the church. Now, if you're not really giving much of anything, you might want to start by giving to the church. But so, switching to the next steps, I'm going to reiterate the first next step. Add up all the money that I gave last year, figure the percentage that I gave, right? Diagnostic tool. This is going to show you where you are in your generosity and how you use your extra. And then number 2, pre-decide to give away blank percentage. So I'm not using all my extra money for myself, but instead invest my riches in heaven, fight against greed, right? And again, not a plan to increase the church's giving, a plan to help all of us be financially balanced. I think you should consider giving to the church and other things. Back in the day, back when I was a young man, I always gave only to my local church. And then somewhere along the line, I'm like, well, there's a lot of other things that I really value. And so I began to give to other things as well, and things that touch my heart. But the main point here is we don't want to hoard all of our money for ourselves. And so those are some pretty serious things to consider. And then the last one, commit to attend the rest of the Balance series. We've got 2 more weeks. So we're talking about more constant correction. So I want to pray for you as you consider this. these are some pretty serious things and could require some major adjustments. First of all, accepting the fact that we do have extra, and then now how do I get more balance with that? So I want to pray for you. Father, we ask for your guidance and your help in our lives with this. When it comes to money, Lord, we just don't usually think we have extra, and oftentimes our finances are so tight. And so, Lord, I pray you'd help us as we look into this, and Lord, that you would free us from any connection we have to materialism and greed by giving to those in need. And we just, Lord, we want to be financially balanced. We want to have our hearts not be bound to stuff. And so we just pray for your help as we take these next steps today. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.